Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. We're here to facilitate inspiring dialogues about the nature of consciousness across disciplines, communities, and practitioners, all with a holistic perspective.
From energy healing to somatic therapies, from neuroscience to meditation, we believe the most interesting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines.
I'm Christabel.
And I'm Keith.
Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. In today's episode, we're joined by Tara Judelle. Tara has experimented with all forms of movement flow for over 30 years, from dance to Tai Chi, a movement improvisation, and ultimately yoga. Certified in the Anusara method, Tara has taught yoga around the world for 17 years. With asana as a gateway, she stepped into philosophy, specifically the non-dual philosophy of Kashmir Shaivism, and has taught and studied with Carlos Pineda and the late Sally Kempton. In 2014, she co-created the School of Embodied Flow with Dr. Scott Lyons, an integrative blend of hatha yoga, somatics, meditation, and transpersonal psychology that elicits the experience of meditation in action. Tara's classes focus on the discovery of embodied anatomy, bringing to the yogic tradition in a scientific yet playful study of the movement vocabulary of the body and the ever-expanding perceptual awareness of the human mind. Following an initial move from Los Angeles to direct a yoga program and retreat center in Bali for several years, Tara now teaches workshops, retreats, and teacher trainings worldwide. Her dynamic style bringing ease and authenticity to a new yoga culture. Welcome, Tara. An absolute pleasure to have you here.
Honored to be here.
So in your work, we have an integration of asana, somatics, movement meditations, tantric philosophy, and transpersonal psychology. I'd love to hear what this means in terms of unlocking the subtle energy flow in the body for healing and awakening.
We have to kind of sit with, when one facilitates yoga, I realize that's sort of an older bio, which means I need to update my website. But I've been teaching over 20 years, and the fundamental question I sit with is, am I free and embodied? This notion of a liberated, embodied being is fundamentally tantric, and Tantra philosophy is, in a nutshell, the one energy, whatever name you wish to call it, manifests as each and every bit of consciousness that is out there. That's us, that's plants, animals, anything you could imagine. And that fundamental mystery that this one thing is becoming, is seeing, is hearing, is moving through us, to wake up to that and know, capital K, the capital T truth. To me, that is the point. And so after about 10 years of teaching the method of Anusara I was initially certified in, which is, biomechanics and yoga, the question I was asking is this working? Is asana working? Or what people think of as yoga, is it working to liberate us inside of our body-mind? And the conclusion I came to at that time, which was around 2008 or 9, was no. It didn't feel like it was working. And I had just spent 2006, 7, and 8 studying pretty intensely with Sally Kempton, who was my... it was something called the transformative journey. It was 2 years of studying the Spandakarakas and the Shiva Sutras, 2 fundamental tantric texts. And the conundrum I was sitting with was that the depthful field of meditation and what the philosophy was pointing to, consciousness is self. That's the first sutra of the Shiva Sutras. Consciousness, which is everything, is self, or Atma, everything, know that. And so I was wrestling for about 2 years, like, how is downward dog, chaturanga, handstand helping anyone know that? And then I met the world of body mind centering, which is a compendium of movement modalities organized in just the fundamental knowing of your body from the inside, right? Something that she would refer to as embodied anatomy, that if I could tap into the marrow of my bones, if I can feel it, then it is there for me to move from, or the skin of my bones, or my skin, or my cerebral spinal fluid, or my organs. And suddenly in that arena, it was a nonverbal bridge that let me know this is consciousness manifesting through us. We can feel it. It's not us, it's the language of us. And I realized that, my father's a physician, and it was very funny. I would say, Dad, do you feel your kidneys? And he said, no, honey, nobody feels their kidneys unless they have a kidney stone. And I said, but why not in wellness? Why do we feel ourselves in pain, except maybe our bladder, our stomach, our heart? Like, everyone can feel those things, or our hand, but why not our kidneys? And that's what I was doing in the world of Bainbridge-Cohen, feeling spleen and kidneys and lungs and embryological patterns. And suddenly that, to me, was the tantric teaching. That was what we were looking for, that I can not only feel my organs in their wellness, but I can listen to them move, which then implies in the inner topography, the intelligence is everywhere. And knowing myself could not ever be the brain looking at this body and saying, this is me, because that is very dualistic and strange and removed, but that you can actually simply tap into it, not only tap into it, but transmit it across Zoom or time space and confirm and feel others feeling it. So the implications to me were asana, cute, nice sketch of what we're trying to talk about, but embodied anatomy and the meditative field, that meditation is manifesting in this language, was just this, record scratch moment for me. And then became, how the hell do I offer that? And in the beginning, it was slipping these things into traditional asana classes and trying to illuminate, using the vocabulary of asana to extract these things. But more and more, it has become what we refer to as, meditative movement or free movement. Words become tricky. But the question, the inquiry is, how do we then act from the intuition and the immensity of what we are that then becomes available to us? It starts a whole new understanding of self.
You mentioned about that key perspective about free and embodied. And so I'm wondering about free and not embodied. The practices that you teach are very grounded in the body. What do you think of spiritual practices which have liberation or awakening as their goal, which kind of ignore or significantly downplay the importance of our physical bodies?
I don't see how you can. I mean, I'd see how you can, but to me, it feels like a halfway up the mountain gig, because it starts to look strangely like dissociation. Like, okay, if I close my eyes and meditate, I'm free. But if I have to walk and talk and interact and do human things, then I'm bound. What's the point of that? I mean, it's what my teachers have said is that's rather dualistic, that sort of renunciate way of saying, right, I have to fuck off to the cave and be there, and there I'm free. And then the question is, well, how free are you? Actually, because if you have to go there to be free, you're not actually very free. Or if your freedom is contingent on you not interacting with your body and your functions and the way that you've been created, then it also feels rather like a prison. Or if your freedom is contingent upon your death, then life is just kind of a hanging out place, which, sure, if you believe that, you believe that, and there's nothing I can do to change that belief. It just isn't how I want to live. It's how I thought originally, because I think there's a lot, it's a lot easier to understand that, oh, okay, if I close my eyes and meditate and I'm in that space, if I'm in samadhi space, I'm free. If you're talking about possible liberation in this body. But once I open my eyes and I go to sit with my family, then I'm a bound little lowly worm entangled in my, my poop and mucus and flesh. That seems so, that kind of bifurcation just feels really destabilizing. And what my teachers have said is that, well, that kind of teaching came out of an era previous to Tantra, or previous to the tantric philosophy, older than, and in that time, the world, villages would be wiped out by famine. People wouldn't live past the age of 40. The world was a dirty, fetid place to escape. And then between the 6th and 10th century, current era, the trade routes, Tantra developed on the Silk trade route. So you had more surplus, more exchange of ideas, more of a notion that this is not such a place to escape, but how do I fully be here? So I feel like I tried the other way. And when I met Tantra, it was what I had been looking for my whole life. And not, when I'm talking about Tantra, I'm not talking about what other scholars would refer to as neo-Tantra, like, sexual tantric practices. I'm not that, it's not Tantra, but that's not my practice or expertise, or what I share, but more just that notion of it's all that, we are that. This, if you get that, you don't need anything else. It changes how you perceive it all. But it's a tricky place to stay in. That's why Tantra is often called the razor's edge. And the inquiry for me as a facilitator of movement, one at this current time, that is involved in how do we embody that? And, embodiment has become a word that's so used that it kind of doesn't mean anything anymore, which is this weird thing humans do to language. But what I mean by that is that, am I in my body and able to listen to it and speak from it and not contract myself or shrink myself, as I feel is happening to people more and more and more as we get more dependent on technology, that they're in their prefrontal cortex and more dissociated from their actual physical body than in it. Especially younger and younger generations coming in, they don't know life without computers, and they don't live inside of the place they sit, as an overgeneralization, but that's my observation.
It's really refreshing to hear you speak so coherently about the importance of practice being life and life being practice, rather than this disassociation, as you phrased it, this separation of, when I'm on my cushion, right? When I'm sitting, when I'm doing this, as opposed to how we move, how we flow, how we communicate, how we interact with others. You mentioned body mind centering, which was founded by Bainbridge-Cohen in 1973. It's been described as this ongoing experiential journey into the alive and changing territory of the body. I love that description.
Just the word phrase makes you melt. Yes, yes, I want to take that journey. What other journey to take?
I'm intrigued, looking at that description and as you said, that feeling tone around it. How often does the term healing arise in the work that you do? Are people who are working with you finding that through this in practice of embodied flow, of connecting heavily into the body in this way? Because it really is a step. As we find when we're working with people, it really is a step to have people connect consciously to their organs, to their blood, to their fluids. Are you finding that they're moving into traumas, integrating traumas and healing things that are held in those body spaces, in those tissues and those organs?
100%. 100%. I mean, there's a process of meeting your body. And a lot of times I think of embodiment in the way that we're doing meeting these different parts, or like switching on lights in the room of yourself. And some things will appear easily, right? You may feel, some people easily can feel their heart. And for some people, feels like a safe place. And other people, that feels like an inaccessible place. For me, the heart was a very difficult place in early years of my practice to stay, and which was kind of the irony of Sally Kempton's journey, I believe, was to descend from the brain to the heart. And that was a very challenging journey for her, coming from an intellectual family. And that's something I really identified with, because when I would start to meditate with her, I'd follow her instructions to take a ladder down to the cave of the heart, and I'd be there, and immediately my energy would go zip. I took, there was like 5 years, so frustrating, until the heart just went, and expanded in such a radical, transformative way. So we're finding the points of access and the points that are inaccessible. And then depending on the student's capacity and willingness to stay with it, to allow that place to become known. And often in this work, inevitably, when we enter, there's a reason we left the body, or the feeling of the body, and going back into those doors and opening those windows can feel vulnerable and sensitive and scary until it's not, because we're sitting in the baseline of, which I think is the crucial piece with yoga, we're sitting with the big energy of self, right? Atma. And that energy fundamentally is what is healing energy, right? That is, the body is encoded for wellness. It's encoded for well-being. The place in meditation automatically delivers us, once we get past the atmospheric, blah, 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 the ripples and the waves. Once we get past that, the essential feeling is always going to be one of bliss. Maybe not ecstatic bliss, but the ground of being feels well. And when we enter ground of being into the vocabulary of different densities and flavors, but all encoded with that same fourth state space, it has the tendency to heal. And I wouldn't promise healing, but it just seems to be the curious way that it goes, because what Tantra says, it gives names to the quality of consciousness, right? That it is purna, it is full, that it is spanda, it is pulsing, that it is svatantriya, it is free, it is prakasha vimarsha, meaning it is luminous, but it also has the capacity to self-reflect. It has the capacity to know itself. It is, and it knows it is. And it does. And somehow, like with body-mind centering, what Bainbridge-Cohen discovered is that, well, if, for example, you tap into the cerebral spinal fluid, like people know in craniosacral therapy, right? My feeling of it, my tuning into it and holding space for it allows it to remember itself in you, right? And then it becomes that the same kind of notion as putting twins, the healthier heartbeat will help synchronize or entrain the weaker heartbeat of, let's say, a premature born baby. Our body's like that. It is looking for the way to healing. And if we potentiate the opportunities, it seems like it moves in the direction of finding that way, which is sort of the basis of, right, acupuncture or Reiki. It's not mysterious. What's mysterious is that we forget it, I think. We always knew it, and then we decided we didn't know it, and we forgot it, and then tried to dissect it all and make it really weird.
Thanks for reminding us about that major point there, that it just happens if you just tune in, drop in, let go, allow, and find that blissful ground of being as you described it. As your practice has evolved, what subtleties in perception have followed? Like, what's been an evolution in your self-perception, being so somatically grounded, somatically oriented? Like, how do you perceive your body differently now than you did before? Have things become more energetic? How would you describe that evolutionary process?
I really do. I would say that the trajectory feels like melting into myself. So I would say that the perception of self comparatively feels like from the surface of the water up. Let's say if you had a lake mountainscape, and I knew really well the surface of the lake and the mountains and all the trees and that perceptual world, and body mind centering, and that is then submerging into the entire ocean that's underneath. Like taking a wormhole through the lake to an underground tunnel into a deep sea that is actually 70% of the world, right? I think that my perception was very two-dimensional, and now it feels, 4D, 5D. I don't know. I can't do anything without having the confirmation of what another teacher of mine, Susan Aposhian, who's a somatic psychologist, calls core flow. So gut, heart, brain synchronizing into a yes. There's just no movement for me without that, or even conversation or teaching or facilitating. There's just the listening has to include all the whole body. And I would say that, following inner prompting. So there's this notion in Tantra that, you are formlessness, form, ichyana, kriya, will, knowledge, action. But those are like one word, as in Sanskrit. Right? That ichyana, kriya, like to listen to, like your yogaing, you're yoking yourself to big energy, is listening to desire in a way that you move from that. That's the only way you move. It's like in the same way animals do. It's like you listen and respond. So there's a quickening of intake, action, response, with less analytical thought, less linear thought, or less concepts like should, less shits given about what anyone else thinks, because thinking is fundamentally flawed, and or their opinions or judgments. So the participation with my body mind is one of trying to make this a healthy cell in a universal body, trying to make this more receptive and more actionable. Like that it's two directional, because I can't harden from listening, but I also can't shut down from actioning. Like inhale, exhale, that's the fundamental nature. So I think I can hear better. I can hear other people from their whole body, not just the words that are being said. I can hear people. How do we say that? I can feel where people are in their body, and know better how to help them arrive in their body not so much with words, but more by arriving there myself and helping them arrive there. And then I can point out when they have, right, from feeling. So those let's say skill sets, which everybody fundamentally has, of listening, receiving, resonating, responding, transmitting, which is all language from Bainbridge-Cohen. We've, in the years of embodied flow, the great thing is that now we can all do this with each other. We know we can. It's not mysterious. It's not eye rolling like, I don't believe, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, don't, it's fine, but we know it. It's not even in question. It's not mysterious. It just is. And that feels like a fundamentally richer place to engage with one another, right? With each other. It's like, we know we feel each other more true. And now I start to question, when people don't live there, what are we talking to? Who are we talking to? What part of you are we talking to? Because I'd like to talk to the one that is you. That's absolutely an amazing cell in this universal body, but it demands that you know who that is. You need to be you so I can be me, so we can engage in this rich way, like sun is the sun and the tree is the tree and the ground is the ground, and it's all a reflection of this big energy. But you don't want the sun to be the tree, and you don't want the tree to try to be the sun, or it all messes up.
I really appreciate you sharing about this sort of magnetism of movement, if you will, when one's in flow. There is an innate wisdom there, and it actually takes me back to 2017 in Tri-Yoga London, where I first experienced one of your workshops. And that was the shift for me, because as somebody who was used to doing more traditional sequence of asana, be it Ashtanga or Bikram, there was this sudden emphasis on the movement between the asana. And that was challenging for me. And I felt really stiff. I'm somebody with no movement practice at that point in my life at all. And then there was this really beautiful organic shift as it became more important and resonant to me than the asana itself. This sense of joining the dots, if you will. And that was the biggest takeaway I had from that workshop. And it's really beautiful to hear all these years later you reflect that back. So I'd love to hear, for our listeners, to share a little bit more about the foundations of movement, right? Embryological foundations of movement. Where are these, our first learning stages of developing this, and how important and integral that is to later life?
Big topic. That's like worthy of about 4 books. Here's this tantric notion of pulsation. Spanda is the fundamental notion of universe pulsing into being, which is exactly the same as us as an egg. Right? This factoid meme that keeps circulating because it's mind-blowing that the egg that created you was in your mother at the time of her birth. So you were there pulsing as some pre-egg follicle, but cell form in your mother, each one of us. And that pulsation is fundamentally echoing, rivering back until when. But so some part of you was already here for however old your mother was, right? When she was conceived. And then it gets weird, because if you keep following that thread back, when weren't some part of you, when wasn't some part of you here? And then in terms of the embryology, the fundamental patterns of how we roll and fold, and this becomes that, the umbilical cord at some point invaginates into you and creates a vortex of energy where the yolk sac, comes in to the embryo, where the amniotic sac comes behind the primitive streak. These layers of our body create fundamental frequencies. Right? The gut tube of you, which is your mouth through your digestive all the way down to your anus, is a different right? That's the endoderm layer of you embryologically, and it has a different quality and texture and resonance than your nervous system layer, right? Your ectoderm layer, the skin, the brain, the nerves. But those are fundamental chords of consciousness, right? What is, I mean, for millions and millions and millions of years, we were just an ectoderm and an endoderm, two layers, right? A neural net and this thing that had intake and output. We call it eating and pooping. And then somehow miraculously, the mesoderm layer starts, muscles, bones, heart, kidneys. So we recapitulate all of this embryologically. So you start to now play with the fundamental textures, or I think of it like the music that consciousness is playing through us, but not just us, all systems. We're so, we'll say all living animal systems are following that same evolutionary and embryological track. And the thing that Bonnie discovered, I think miraculously, is that if you can tune into the system, it fundamentally starts to find its pitch or its note, its frequency. It remembers the blueprint that it was meant to have. So a lot of the healing comes from going back and reliving, but not, so, you could use imagination, but at some point you're actually embodying it. You're actually there floating in the womb. Or if you had, for example, an experience in the womb where you didn't have enough room. Some people, their bodies sometimes feel like they have a glove around them, or they might feel trapped, or they might feel a curve in their body where they were stuck in a certain way in utero, that reworking that pattern can not just free up their body, but there's a mental, correlative, developmental piece of it that then shifts and then potentiates a whole new river of energy that got blocked somehow or stuck. And, we're just trying to find where is flow? Where is the flow of energy? Where is it stagnated? And how can we open it and access it? For example, one of my colleagues worked with a kid who was diagnosed with Asperger's. And one theory that Bonnie, discovered is that some kids that have, let's say, neurodiversity didn't have enough pushing in utero, which is just a baby's developmental patterns. There's a lot of pushing with the feet. So what that person did in working with the person was work a lot on them. Now, at that time, they were like 12 or 13, doing pushing patterns, and doing a lot of that kind of movement with boundaried movement, but with pushing. And that had a correlative effect on his engagement with other people at that point in time, like his social capacity. So it's curious what either embryological patterns or developmental patterns we skipped, or for whatever reasons, pre-verbally or for lots of reasons. When we go back and work the patterns, it opens up our body in the integrated puzzle that it is. You can't just you pull one thread, but you don't know where it goes in the whole web of you.
Yeah, you're describing this thing in which if we just listen, if we just follow the thread, the resonance inward, and take that inner journey, that we're guided exactly where we need to be guided.
Yeah, and keep remembering you have the permission to listen, because ultimately that's your liberation. You're the authority of this energy. You're the guardian of this ecosystem that is called you. So if we give away agency when we cease to be able to listen. We then have to go to, someone says to you, this is what you feel, this is what's wrong, this is the thing. And that's not to say don't consult people, but ultimately the decisions come down to you listening. Did that medicine make you feel better? No, it made me feel shit. Well, keep taking it. No, my body says no. Like, that's an authoritative decision. Like, no, take this pill. You will be like, you have to learn that authority, right? There's so many experts that have no idea what we're talking. They have no idea. They don't feel their body. So how do you know if it works? Dr. So-and-so, do you have a uterus? No. How do you know what it feels like to take this medication? Because the studies say. I want to know from the inside, is it true? How does this make you feel? If you don't know how you feel, then you don't have a baseline to measure if you're doing okay.
Yeah, this is a big process for every individual to actually reclaim their power, their personal power and authority. Yeah, there's so many signals out there in culture and society and that say that that's all outside of us. And it seems like it's very hard to do the inner journey, the seeking, the healing, the spiritual quest, what have you, without realizing that the only power that exists is really within you. And that's up to you to claim and cultivate and understand and own.
And no religion or government necessarily wants you to know that, because then it's very hard to make money off of you. It's important to say that because agency has been stripped away from humans in such slow and insidious ways that we don't know anymore what we don't know. We've been so removed from nature and so removed from listening to ourselves that we don't even understand what we're not listening to. The younger and younger and younger generations have no idea what is the baseline.
Yeah, so this really emphasizes your somatic centralization, or just the importance of being with the body, listening to the body and grounding your experience through your body, as this is, as yoga often says, is this is the temple. This is your temple. Your body is your temple. And obviously you worship in the temple and you live in the temple. So in terms of the word energy, you've used the word energy a handful of times, often saying big energy or follow the energy. I'm just curious about, because you're so well informed and utilize a lot of anatomy and particularly anatomy a lot of people aren't used to, like cerebral spinal fluid and embryological germ layers. These things are not, most people don't talk much or are aware of these aspects of our physical anatomy. What about subtle anatomy, traditional yogic subtle anatomy? Does your teaching or conversation with students and what have you go into the realms of chakras, auras, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, my curiosity about subtle anatomy is, what were they talking about? What were they talking about? So I often talk about chakras with the endocrine system. I feel like and that's something that Bonnie Bainbridge did a bit. Yeah, I mean, endocrine system is a nice doorway into chakras, though it's not necessarily the endocrine system. And I love the subtle anatomy. I'm constantly curious and also in, with the meridians, like I'm looking a lot at Chinese medicine and just inquiring, like, what did they feel? What was it they were feeling? And I never think I know, because it's mysterious. So sometimes, for example, debates I've heard among people are like, well, are we feeling the glands or are we feeling the secretions from the glands? And how do you know which? Like, have you landed on the gland or have you landed on its secretions? And, and I know that the subtlety, the last time I was with Bonnie, she was talking about how being in her glial cells was helping her with electromagnetic radiation. And so that took me on a whole puzzle few years. It's feeling like, am I in my glial cells now? I feel like I am. But there was this moment where she just puts your hands on you and she's like, that's glial cells. And you go, oh yeah. But then do I know it enough to then turn around and do that to someone else? That's, and now I'm like, see it, like you guys now are in your glial cells. So now we've got that next, right? Thank you for that. That was helping one of you. I think you just helped bring me there, Keith. Yeah. So that's so cool, right? So it's a shorthand way. So is that subtle body? Or is that like, this is a question. The nuances of breath, the nuances of, I remember Richard Freeman saying in a the one time I saw him in a workshop, talking about the flipping of the fish that happens between the in-breath and the out-breath. And I think I've spent every day since that workshop being like, is that the flipping of the fish? Maybe I even heard him wrong. Like what? Maybe he's like, this is a nice dish. I don't know what he said. Yeah, but I think, all of this is, let's say, layers of an inner topography that the more of us that hang out there, the more we can converse about it. And we're sitting in realms where maybe we'll never have the real answer. We'll have lots of people who will say, this is what it says. But I'm always curious about who was writing this shit down. Because, like if you've gone to Burning Man and then somebody writes a book about Burning Man, you're like, who is writing the book? Like, weren't you just looking out there doing your thing? So I'm a little bit suspicious of like the people who wrote it down, because I kind of wonder, I'm like, I don't know, maybe you were just the note taker and you didn't really get it. Like, were you the one who was assigned notes of the meeting, or are you actually the one who was experiencing it? Questions that we sit with. But yes, I like the subtle body.
This is something we talk about actually, Tara, a lot in our trainings, the importance of the experiential. It's not for Keith or I or anybody to sort of say, oh, this is what it is to sit here, right? Whether it's a chakra or an organ or another part of the subtle anatomy, the nadi system. But, what is it you're experiencing? So not for anybody to be diagnosing other, as you said, but to allow that sovereignty, allow that inner connection in others, to encourage it rather than to allow it. We were saddened to learn of the passing of your friend and mentor, Sally Kempton, in recent weeks. I wonder if you can share something of how Sally's teaching has influenced your journey and a little of her unique gift to this world.
Thank you for that. Sally Kempton, who has 2 amazing books out and really endless, many courses are still on her website, some of which I'm just now going back and listening to. She was 80 this year, and she was somebody who early in the 70s was a feminist, a radical feminist, and writer for, downtown New York magazines like Esquire and Village Voice, and then radically decided to move to the ashram because she fell in love with consciousness. She fell in love with what I think was a radical leap to leave a very intellectually stimulating and kind of poised to be published author life, and to fall so in love with, she basically had a Shaktipat experience, let's say around in her 30s, that is an experience where you have a glimpse of the big energy. And, you said I use this word energy a lot, like it's all energy. Everything is energy. So it's hard once you understand that this is all about how do we permit energy to move through us? How do we permit ourselves to experience energy and free it? This is what yoga is. So she had that glimpse, and I devoted herself eventually after 30 years in the ashram to giving each one of us that information in whatever way she could. She took very esoteric teachings and made them tangible, accessible, especially meditation. And she gave us an empowered, intelligent female lens to and mothered us in a very loving and yet erudite. She never talked down to anybody, and it was never hierarchical. You know, both Sally and Bonnie Bainbridge, who are similar in age, model a very like a circular, embracing way of honoring that we're the same. I'm not above you. This is not the right answer. There's not the right way. And what comes out of you is noble and honorable, and also the divinity or the one energy expressing respectfully. She, managed to communicate through yoga journal articles and traveled all the way up until like maybe the last year of her life to deliver this in ways that doula us into our next iteration of consciousness. It's a life of complete service, even outside of the ashram, even more so. So to have an example of somebody who, very, I think, quietly, even though she was well known, spent a life in service to making sure we know these, to unlock, give us the keys to these teachings, not for $1 million, not for like an 8-level course that one day you'll get the secret initiation, not, in ways that are like, I have the knowledge and you don't, lowly worm, and not in any creepy, predatorial way, which sadly is just too, I don't think I've found a teacher that modeled such loving devotion and such unilateral respect for humans and love for their wildness, permission to be weird and to make mistakes, but always, the desperate plea for us to meditate and to know the connection to this big energy. I just, I think I owe everything I teach to the things she unlocked inside of myself, and just so happy that she got to touch so many people. There was a beautiful memorial to Sally a few weeks ago, and it's on her website. If you go to sallykempton.com, there's a little retrospective of her life, a film that some people put together, and I really recommend that people listen. There's also things you can watch on YouTube that are, like there's a 2014 Wanderlust Speakeasy and other things that it will transmit her luminescence.
I'm curious to get another personal kind of reflection, because we have a connection with Bali. Christabel and I lived there for almost 2 years, and we'll be going back there next year.
Great.
I was just curious, how has the island and its peoples and its land and its traditions, how has it impacted you? What's it like to be regularly teaching there?
I love Bali so much. It's an anomaly, Bali. Somebody said to me, the first time I was there is 2009. I lived there for 2 years, in 2009 to 11. And then I've been back every year, except a little break in the pandemic. First of all, the tantric teachings somehow found themselves on the island of Bali. They traveled. I mean, the Hindu tantric teachings traveled down from South India through Indonesia, and somehow miraculously on this teeny tiny little node of consciousness landed there. And so you have our gods, right? Vishnu and Shiva and Brahma and Saraswati and Lakshmi, and everything is there, but combined with the local animism and the most gorgeous, jungly, mountainous, volcanic island in the middle of the ring of fire and the coral triangle. It's rich with nature, but I haven't met, and I've traveled to a lot of countries, a people nicer than the Balinese. They're just, when I first was running, I moved there to run a yoga center down in Canggu, and I would sometimes, on my scooter, and I'd be late and I'd be tripping up the stairs to the front desk to go to my yoga class. And they'd be like, "Salamat pagi, Tara, Ibu Tara, salamat pagi." And I'd be like, and then they'd be like, "Have a good yoga class," with this little gleam in their eye because I was such a dick. I'm the yoga teacher and they're just naturally yoga. Even that's one of their names, right? Like one of the staff is named Yoga, and they are yoga. I need practice. I need a lot of practice. And they live in such a beautiful space. And I think the rituals of offerings and as a daily practice. The last time I was there, last year, I was staying in a little Balinese village that was a Brahmin village where either side was a temple. So every day, like the sweeping of the temple starts about 4 a.m. and then the bells and the things and the incense and, the orientation to the mountains and the volcanoes, just everything. I think you asked me, how did it influence the teaching? Like I could not, after Bali, go back into a 4-walled yoga studio and say, "Let's do yoga." God, what are we doing? Why are we putting ourselves in a square room on a concrete floor when this is where you want to practice in a continuum with the birds and the butterflies and nature and people in the rice fields? I think it's such a resilient culture and such a beautiful people. And I pray for that island that it stays itself. And I pray for that island that people that come to the island respect the Balinese and respect that we're guests on the island. As some of my drivers will say, we're guests, and privileged to be there.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. Couldn't have summed up better why we've chosen to do our second in-person retreat there and our first in-person training next year. So on that note, we'd love to hear more about your offerings, how people can find you, what you have coming up, so we can share that with our audience.
I have 2 websites. One is embodiedflow.com, which is dedicated to the offerings of the school. We have about 40 or 50 either certified or inspired teachers that have come through Embodied Flow, and you can find them on the website, as well as eventually we have to update it, but go to their websites, find their offerings, some amazing humans and teachers in about 40 different countries. And I personally have a 200-hour training coming up in Bali in October, and a 300-hour training coming up in Bali 2024 January and February, and those details are on embodiedflow.com. And then I have tarajudelle.com, my name, which just is offerings that are other retreats and things that are outside of necessarily being Embodied Flow, though that's everything I teach. Maybe that will all be one website. Yeah. And I hold classes online. Eventually we'll have a platform that will be coming soon.
Well, I wanted to thank you so much for time and energy and wisdom today, for sharing that with us.
It's been a pleasure to get to know you and to hear your expanded vision of what yoga can be. That word, unfortunately, has fallen into many people's kind of a relationship with what might happen in a gym or just what the asana practice might look like, but it means so much more. And to see you amongst other yoga teachers really bringing forward a very contemporary, modern approach to utilizing asana for actual deep, grounded, integrated practice is just inspiring and very affirming to its purpose.
Thank you guys are beautiful energy, and we have to meet up when you're in Bali if we intersect there.
That would be fantastic.
Thanks for listening to the episode. What really supports the podcast is providing a rating and review of the show on your preferred listening platform. This helps us get the message out to a wider audience. If the topics we discussed today appeal to you, do take a moment to subscribe. Lastly, we invite you to check out our website, fielddynamicshealing.com, to learn about our training programs, private session work, and to see how we're setting the standard in contemporary energy healing. Many thanks, and see you next time.